Okay, hey there, we're back, and we're now going to go through Chapter 2 in Murach's second edition of MySQL and PHP. We have very little. My goal is not to read every single line and page and explain every single detail in this chapter, but to highlight the highlights of it. There's some things as I've been reading through the chapter I haven't used and need to spend a little more time digging in, but basically the goal is to get a quick overview, see where this chapter is taking us, and then go from there to keep moving forward. So the one thing that I don't like about this chapter, honestly, is that it really assumes that you are a programmer and that you know a lot of basic programming. So in this class, we do assume you have taken a programming class. We do assume that you know HTML, and we do assume that you know MySQL. So with that, with that, we expect you to be a little more advanced. But honestly, I feel like Chapter 2 is trying to cram a whole lot of stuff that would normally take, like if you took the Python class with me, we really took our time going through if statements and loops, and it really assumed that you didn't know anything. So here they're going through pretty quickly a lot of stuff. Let's move on. Explain the difference how PHP is embedded with HTML. There is a marriage between PHP and HTML. Distinguish between PHP statements and comments. Talk about the data types. There are 6 data types in PHP, excuse me, 4 of which are primary. Some rules for variable names, declaring variables, using the get and post array function, the echo statement. Describes some use of some built-in functions, the format date, HTML special characters, filter input, that was new to me, include and require, how to attack an XSS attack works and to protect against that. I think that should be something we should dig into. Definitely read that closely. Describe the rules for evaluating conditions, that's if statements. Describe the flow of control, if, while, for statements. So again, some of that stuff right there, while loops and for statements and if statements, a lot of times we'll spend a whole chapter in other classes on that. Okay, so here's what I wish they did in the book, which they don't, is actually give code examples that we can run. They show a picture of it. But if you take a look here, that what they have, I'm trying to get my little drawing thing going here. What they have right here is PHP code. PHP code starts here and it ends. It starts with this tag. It's like the starting of an HTML tag, and then it ends here. So everything inside of here basically needs to be the syntax of PHP. $, $first name, underbar, that is a variable assignment. And it's pulling that variable assignment from an HTML page which had a form in it that had an action with a get method. So what happens is this PHP code is assigning values to first name and last name. And it's actually doing it even before the actual HTML. Now here we have a whole lot of HTML code, just straight HTML. And embedded, so PHP code is living outside of the HTML, and then PHP code is living inside, embedded in the HTML. And here it's saying, start my PHP, run the command echo, which is like a print statement, and show last name. Also notice that there's a semicolon at the end of every single PHP line of code. Notice up here, semicolon. Semicolon up here. And you'll see here, this is the beginning of a PHP tag and the end of a PHP tag. the beginning of a PHP tag, and the end of the PHP tag. So what happens is this. On your web server, on your hosting account, on your local host web server, PHP is a language sitting there. There's a folder in the XAMPP called PHP, that interpreter. And the web server is saying, oh, you want to look at this web page. I see that the web page is ending in .php. So that means I need to run it through the PHP interpreter before I spit it out so you can see it in the browser. And it's taking and looking for within that web page the less than question mark PHP as the starting of the, oh, here's where PHP code lives. Do this PHP work, and then whatever it does, just do it, and maybe it's printing out a statement, maybe it's assigning a variable, maybe it's looping, maybe it's reading a database. But it does all that work on the server, and then finally it says, okay, I'm done doing that work. I now have provided for you HTML that I'm going to then send out to the browser. And then here's what it looks like when it's done. So as you can see here, at the first couple of lines right here, we're getting the first name and the last name, and that's happening from a web form, and then we're going to display it here. And then the end result is looking at the end result is looking here at the page. As a matter of fact, I think we can actually go to Book Apps 02. So let me pull that up real quick. See if I can get that. File, Open Project, that's Solutions, htdoc. Here's Book Apps, Future Value. Okay, and here's our index PHP page. Okay, boom. So let's run this and see what happens. Let's get the web host running. XAMPP. As you can see, it didn't have Apache running. Okay, so now my investment amount is going to be $350,000. I want to make 10%, and how about in 12 years? So if I had $350,000 and I had 12 years, I could turn that into a little over $1 million. So that's the code, but that's not this code. So see, they're messing around with us. I'm not happy that the book is not giving us this actual code to work on. Okay, that gets us to page 46, page 47. Page 49, there's a couple of key points here. First of all, whoops, go to draw mode. This is the start and this is the end of a multi-line comment block of code that PHP knows to look for these two characters and then these two characters. And this is a common way that if you wanted to have a large block of code. This is a common way, the / to put a single line of code. And notice here is a bunch of code. There's the semicolon at the end of the statement, but then here's two comments at the end of that line. And that's another way of commenting the code. And another way of commenting code with a single line is the use of the pound sign. So there's several different ways that you can comment PHP code. And commenting your code really helps because you might have to go back and fix your code. It's nice to know what you did. PHP syntax rules, page 49. PHP statements, every line of code has to end with a semicolon. and it doesn't care about extra white spaces. If you want to organize your PHP code in such a way that you have extra white spaces to make it look more readable, you can. There are 6 integer types, or 6 data types, one of which is an integer. That's basically a whole number, 0 to infinity, and then also negative numbers. And then a double is a float, which would be a decimal point. A boolean is either true or false. A string is text, and those 4 are the most common. An array is a list of values, and you can actually have arrays of integers, arrays of doubles, arrays of booleans. And an object, we just get into object-oriented programming a little bit in chapter 14. We'll decide when we get there how much we want to dig into that. Here you see some examples of an integer value, 15 minus 21 doubles, which is floating. Boolean is either true or false, and then string values. And then here's another example with double values using scientific notation is a valid list. You assign if you're used to C or Java, a lot of times you have to say string the variable name and then the value, or float the variable name and then the value, integer. You do not have to declare the actual type. What will happen is the type will actually be declared by the value that you're assigning to it. What you do need to know, though, is all all variables start with a $sign. So here we have $count. That's the variable count is equal to 10, and we end the line with a semicolon. $sign first under bar name, and it's in single quotes. It's in double quotes. Here you're assigning a variable to a variable, and you can see that you can assign a variable to a variable. Okay, how about some rules for variable names? Variable names are case sensitive. Variable names can contain letters, numbers, and underscores. They cannot contain special characters. Variable names cannot begin with a digit or 2 underscores. Variable names can't be used that are variable names can't use names that are reserved words, and such as the variable name $this is a reserved word for objects. The word false, you can't go $false, $true. Those are all reserved words. And all of us should understand the concept of keywords or reserved words in the programming language. Now here what's interesting is a constant can be defined, and that value will not be allowed to be changed. And it's a good practice to define constants, and when you write them, to write them as uppercase, and they do not need a $sign before them. So if you wanted to have a value of pi equal to 3.141592, you would do that with the define statement. And notice there's a semicolon at the end of the statement. Now, here's an example of, and we're on page 54 and 55. Notice here, this is HTML code. It's basically a form. This action in the form says when you hit the submit button, I want you to do the program called display.php using the get method. And we have a first name text box and a last name text box. And this name here, case sensitive, is the name of the value that will be passed to the program. Now, because we used a get, and we have this program called display.php, in that display.php, we use this get statement and says, get me the value from the page you just came from and put it into this variable, that I now can use the variable. When you see the GET request, you will notice in your URL, you will notice all of the data being displayed. The GET is very quick and very easy to get data from one point to the other. However, the POST is a lot more secure and will encrypt the data. So depending upon the type of data that you're sending will depend on when to use the GET and the POST. The GET is easy for simple stuff, and that you wouldn't want to be using a GET for banking information. You'd want to be using a POST. And here is, you can actually, here is a situation where you're having a link, you're making a link that you can click on, display name, and you're actually passing all of that information into the display name program. So by using the GET method, you could actually not have a form at all and just pass that information. Now here is an information with the POST, an example of the POST. And the POST request will not display the name, will not display the information. And here in the HTML page, you'd use the method, the word POST, method POST, and instead of the $get, you'd use $post to get the data. So it really depends on the type of data that you're transmitting from your page to the next place. Typically for database, when you're updating databases and things like that, you want to use the POST. Use the GET method to get data from a database, and you're not worried about things blowing up. So if you're going to just send a customer ID number, you can take that GET and then it's going to do a query. But if you're going to take the information and update a database with it, then you're going to want to use the POST. And this is a good list of when to use POST. Also, POST is used for large amounts of data as well. This Chrome dialog box that displays if the user tries to refresh a post. So a lot of times when you do a POST command and it hasn't gone through, you'll get this message. Okay, here's a couple of examples of dealing with strings. You'll see that the Bob and Roberts is assigned, and here you can see two different ways of assigning a null, either quote quote or the word null. Here what's interesting is that $name equals name plus the value of first name. But that's happening in allowed because it's done in double quotes. If you were to do it in single quotes, it wouldn't allow for variable substitution. And the other thing that happens, especially in March when we're dealing with St. Patty's Day, is what if you need to have a single quote? What you would do is you would put the single quote inside of the double quotes. What if you needed to put double quotes? You would then put them inside of single quotes. Oh, wait a minute, I gotta get out of draw mode. There we go. Okay, we just did that. Here's some examples of concatenating. How do you concatenate, put two things together? The concatenation character in PHP is a period. Other languages, it's a plus sign. It really depends on the language. But in PHP, it's a period. And also notice here that they have comments at the end of the line. This is just documentation within the end of the line. And it's showing you what would be displayed. This price string will actually display that because of the way it concatenated the word price and the value of price. Here we have an example of HTML code and an embedded echo statement. And then we have the same thing with the HTML special characters function. So we're on page 59 in the book, and it introduces the HTML special characters function. A couple of pages later, up at figure 10, it will describe it in a little more detail. But basically, it's a safety net to use HTML special characters to make sure insecure data and attacks of bad data don't get through, where they try to do things like concatenate an and sign and other things to your data. So using HTML special characters is a very good safe practice for data integrity coming into your PHP programs. Here's some examples of arithmetic operators: plus, minus, multiply, divide, exponential, plus plus to add a counter, and minus minus to subtract from a counter. Again, this is pretty basic stuff, and if you don't know programming at this level, you shouldn't be in this class. Here's some examples of some simple numeric expressions where you can see addition, multiplication, subtraction, exponential, all happening. Here's some calculations to calculate discount, just some examples of some math statements. Order of precedence. Order of precedence and the use of parentheses. What is it? Go. I gotta look that one up. Go tell my. Okay, so I was brain dead for a minute and I had to look it up. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Parentheses, exponential, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Parentheses, exponential, then multiplication, then division, then addition, then finally subtraction. So, so order of precedence always needs to be considered here. Notice that 3 plus 4 times 5 here is equal to 23. 3 plus 4 times 5 is equal to 35. So when you're doing your programming, make sure you're sensitive to the arithmetic order of precedence. Compounding, basically this is like doing plus plus, and you can just, it's another way of writing a statement. I don't use this a lot. I find it's hard to read. Here, for instance, there's a compound operator, this last statement, where it's saying, take the existing value of name and add it to Harris. Where I'd rather go name equals name concatenated to Harris. I just think the standard operator here, this is easier to read and understand, even though this is acceptable. I find that this is a better practice for readability of code. 3 ways to increment a counter. You can go count and think about this in a loop situation. Count equals to 1, you can go count plus 1, and then, or you can use a compound assignment, or you can even just go count plus plus. There's 3 ways of doing it. I've probably used the second two a few times because I've just started getting used to it over the years, but again, they didn't have these things available to me when I took my first basic and Fortran programming class in 1969, so it's hard to break those habits. All of these work. Here's some more examples, and that's going to get us, let's see, that gives us page 61, page 62, 63. And now what's interesting here is the number format. A lot of times we'll have, especially a float number, we'll have a float number and we want to be able to see it with a comma. We want to be able to see it with a certain number of decimal points, especially if you're dealing with a report and you want it to line up nice, and maybe it's $5, but you have something else that's $3.75, and the number won't line up unless you use a number format statement correctly. Date functions, I always have to look them up no matter the language because they're always slightly different, but you can take a date value and you can display that date value in any number of ways, and if you just type in PHP date function, you'll find the one that you want. Is there a value? True if name has not been set. Empty is true if it has been set. And true if the price is a numeric, if $price is numeric. So these are some built-in functions that are available in PHP. A lot of times we do that. We use functions like this. So we'll have an if statement to say, if this is true, then it's okay to do this math. If not, send it back to the user to ask for better data. There's the product discount calculator, and I think we've already seen that. And there it is with the answer. So we have an HTML page that we type in the product, the list price, and the percentage discount, and then the PHP page, which is going to display the results. Okay, that's getting us to page 69, and that gets us into 70. There's the code for all that, so take a look at that, and it's really self-explanatory. And if you have not done the PHP 50 programming assignments yet in Module 1, you really shouldn't be here. I should have said that at the beginning, or maybe I did, I forgot. But by going through those 50 small little programs, you will learn all this stuff really, really quickly. You can see here that the relational operator is comparing, is last name equal to the word Harris? So what's interesting, in an if statement, you would not go last name equals Harris, you'd go last name equals Harris. And that's common, whereas an assignment, you'd say last name equals Harris means you're saying that I want the variable last name to be equal to the value of Harris. This relational operator is used for comparison. This is not equal to, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. The exclamation point is for not, and is if this is true and this is true, or if this is true or this is true. And these are used in if statements. And here's some examples of some if statements. If this is empty, then do this. Send the message. You must enter your name first, else message is equal to hello. So again, our assumption is you already know how to do an if statement. Notice that they have the parentheses, they use the curly Q brackets. So let's take a look at the basic structure. We have if, the starting of a parentheses, if this is, what's going on here? I didn't mean to do that. Okay, that was fun. If this statement is true, then do the work starting at this curly Q bracket, ending at this curly Q bracket. Else, do this work here, ending at this curly Q bracket right here. So this is a standard if statement, and it's pretty similar to just about every single other language that you've ever worked on. Here's an example of else if statements that you can say if this is true, else if this is true, else if this is true, else if this is true. Then do the work inside of each of those brackets of code. If this stuff isn't making sense to you, then you're going to have to spend a little extra time understanding some basic programming. And again, hopefully you've gone through the 50 programs in the PHP Basics assignment. Nested if statements, basically you can put an if statement within inside of an if statement. And now we get into looping. And looping allows us to iterate over information. It's great for doing multiple lines of code. You'll loop over your data. So while the counter is less than or equal to 5, display this data information. And here we have a for counter equals 1. While counter is less than or equal to 5, and then increment the counter by 1. This is a little for loop, and it displays the data there. I think I have an example of that in the PHP 50. Here's a while loop example. While this situation is true, do the work that's in here. Another for loop, an example for the future calculator. So there's more than one way of, for example, of looping depending on the need. Some built-in functions. We're going to talk more about the include, and definitely the include we'll work on, and the exit and die. And that basically allows us to include other segments of code, allows us to exit out, allows us to die if situations are different. Read the details on that on page 78 and 79. And here's some examples of it in use. Read the examples on page 78, 79, and 80. So what's interesting here is this is a good example of moving up and down directories. A lot of times, if you're in some PHP code and it lives in one directory, but you need to include a file in another directory, you need to understand, are you one or two directories up or down a directory? So this syntax right here is really, really important. Let's see, does it show what page that's on? No, that figures. Where is that? Okay, on page 79. Kind of put a little sticky note or something there on page 79, because a lot of times you'll be looking for that. You'll be saying, I'm trying to pull some PHP code from another folder, from another directory, and I need to make sure I'm in the right relative position. Okay, future value calculator, that's the HTML page. There's the display results page. And now here you can see that code has been added to basically send back a message because it's doing some evaluation in the display. So if you go to page 85, there's the you'll see here that they've added code that says basically if there isn't correct data in there, then I want to send back an error message, and it's using that. And what's interesting here is they've taken the index HTML page and turned it into an index PHP page and added the HTML special characters to help make sure that we're not going to get attacked. So this is a good use of that HTML special characters function. And then you can see here we're validating whether or not the value that got sent in from the form is true. And by validating that, then we're saying, hey, I'm going to send back an error message. And that error message then will display on the page. And here, let's see, error message, somewhere around there should be a print error message. Display the final results. And we're displaying the code, calculating it, applying the percentage, and I would have expected investment. I would have expected an error message to display here. Include error message not. I would have expected a print or echo error message in one of the lines of code. So read through those pages, a little more detail than I'm covering over it, but it's basically at a high level. phpnet.docs, all the documentation you want on PHP is out there, and the page looks like this. I don't do PHP as much as I used to years ago, and whenever I get stuck, a quick Google PHP and what my question is, and there's a million answers out there. And then some information on how to get to the PHP manual. But lots of stuff out there. Again, this is assuming you're not a baby novice programmer. If you are, you're going to spend a little more time in this. If you're not, you should be able to go through this pretty quickly. And more important, really do those 50 do that homework assignment of 50 PHP programs, because that is pretty much a simple version of all of this. With no explanation, you just do it, you read it, and you go, oh, I get it, I see how that works, and it'll be fine. Okay, so that gets us through Module 1. Good news, Chapter 3 is going to be pretty easy, and so you got a week to get this all done, and good luck.